This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. With the US presidential polls on the horizon, a special report on what's at stake for China-based companies and how ready are they to adapt to a potential Harris or Trump presidency. And time is running out for China to hit that 5% economic growth target. We ask an expert in international finance to assess the chances of a major fiscal boost as Beijing's top lawmakers convene. A Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim set to visit China on a 4-day trip to strengthen ties with its top trading partner amid ongoing tensions over competing territorial claims in the South China Sea. And in business, SK Innovation posts a net loss for the third quarter off the back of falling oil prices and concerns about a slowdown in the Chinese economy. Ahead on East Asia tonight, North Korea wins the Under-17 Women's World Cup for a record third time with an undefeated run to the top that cements its position as the most successful team in the tournament's history. Running a business can be a matter of calculated risks, more so for companies caught in the US-China trade war, facing pressure to reshape their China strategy. And as we count down to the US presidential polls, CNA's Deborah Wong finds out what's at stake for firms based in Asia's biggest economy.
If you've ever booked a short-term rental, you most likely come across smart locks like these, which are popular in the US and Europe. Singaporean startup Igloo Company is among several players in this market that have set up a manufacturing base in China.
China is very well known for the helmet product development. And so I think over here we established this as a center of the engineering excellence where R&D and mostly will be based out of this place, just so that we can continue to leverage on the talents and the maturity of the supply chain.
But it's fast becoming tricky.
We do have a core IP where this core IP relies on specific chipsets that we want to use in the product development. We intentionally choose the chipset, not the China-based, because of the ongoing US tariff issue. And doing so will ensure that all this can be easily replicated, and more importantly, it helps us to diversify and do the manufacturing in overseas.
US slapped a 100% tariff rate on Chinese electric vehicles and 50% on Chinese semiconductors, among a slew of hikes. The ongoing trade war that started back in 2018 has since spanned 2 administrations and looks set to bleed well into the next. The US has long accused China of unfair trade practices. It's been a hot topic in the upcoming US presidential polls.
They may not see eye to eye on a wide spectrum of policies, but when it comes to China, both US presidential candidates believe that tariffs are necessary to protect the US economy. So the question isn't whether there will be more tariffs in the next administration. The question is how much more. And even companies that are not currently affected are starting to get worried.
A survey by NGO The Conference Board found that 55% of China-based CEOs of mostly US and European MNCs think US and China relations will worsen over the next 3 years. The same survey found that 58% expect investments or operations to shift away from China to India in the next 2 years. Igloo, for one, has decided to branch out part of its operations to Vietnam.
Most of the partners, they actually also serving the US market. So they also share the same sentiment because of ongoing tariff issues, tension between these 2 countries. In the near future, this issue will not be resolved anytime soon. When they start to shift the operations, we tap along with their factory move to the Vietnam.
Igloo's local partner in Huizhou, an industrial city in Guangdong, has assembled their smart locks for over 2 years. The province has been hit by a slew of factory closures in recent years. The company is counting on its diverse customer base to defy the odds.
那么我们公司40%是去美国的。那么美国这个公司跟我们合作了20多年了，合作非常深度合作的一个公司了，那就谁也离不开谁，不管谁去当总统，影响不大。我们这个工厂20多年了，那么我们一定有一定的企业文化，也有很稳定的一个客户。 那么客户不是指美国嘛？我刚说的日本我们也有，欧洲、北欧、西欧都有，所以说这点不是我们担心的。
Mr. Liu is training his workers to handle new tech like AI in the assembly process. He believes it's one way to stay relevant as China shifts gears to advanced manufacturing.
Although we're seeing a slowdown of foreign investments into China, all of the companies, all of the CEOs I talk to don't want to exit the market. What they want is to protect the access to the China market while also trying to increase the resilience of their global operations. And over 70% of them told us that they are actually investing more in China for China localization. The Chinese economy itself has, over the past decades, moved up the value chain and now actually provides a very viable alternative to these companies to continue not only producing, but also creating, designing and innovating here in China.
For Igloo, having spent years plugged into a mature supply chain in China, the company still plans to base most of its operations here.
Supply chain landscape usually takes years to build up to its quality and also maturity. So I think we still continue to balance by tapping the China resources as well as to continue manufacture our product overseas.
China's strategy to go big on tech is a double-edged sword. Although it builds domestic resilience, it also leaves the country vulnerable to tariffs.
If we look at the next decade of economic growth, a lot of it will depend on technological innovation. It is not surprising that technology is becoming one of the factors of tension in the geopolitical landscape, because in many ways it will define the power of a given country. So what we're seeing right now is that those key technologies that would impact the economic power of an economy are being the subject of some of these restrictions.
The question is, how far will the new U.S. administration go in squeezing China, and can companies continue to withstand the pressure?
And for more on this, we are joined now by CNA's Deborah Wong. Deborah, from your story there, we can see that foreign companies, they're clearly feeling, the jitters of this trade war. But based on what you've spoken to them about, how prepared are they in terms of adapting, whether it's going to be a Harris or a Trump presidency?
Well, they are bracing for it. All the foreign companies are bracing for it because there is a consensus among foreign companies and residents alike that there will still be trade restrictions wherever the chips may fall. Now, it's also just a matter of how high these tariffs will be. When we talk about a Kamala Harris presidency, she is expected to continue Biden's policy of incremental changes and also international alliances against Beijing. And we've seen that play out over the last few years. When we talk about a Trump-led presidency, that could take on a more erratic approach like what we saw in his previous administration, which eventually led to the US-China trade war in 2018. Now, that trade war that began in 2018, there has been, since then, has been an increasing trend of companies adopting a China plus one strategy. So the business continuity plan has already been in place for a while. Companies have already started to look at diverse supply chains. Like what you saw in the story, Mr. Montefahelu, he also talked about how companies are also looking at localization, meaning they still want to retain that access to the China market, and so they are developing strategies to tap on that Chinese appetite. Now, that scale preparedness hinges on which countries and industries they're in. For instance, Chinese electric vehicles, that's been in the news lately. It's also taking center stage in the whole trade war. That has been slapped with 100% tariff rate from the US. So we're seeing increasingly manufacturers exploring alternatives. We could also see them potentially opening factories in Mexico to serve as sort of a backdoor to the US.
And we can see, Deborah, a lot of China's, growth is really because of its focus on tech, which also at the same time leaves it vulnerable to, tariffs. So how then do you think the government is circumventing that?
Well, if anything, the restrictions have accelerated China's push to become self-reliant. Beijing has a Made in China 2025 roadmap. It is essentially a pledge to focus on economic self-reliance as well as tech independence. In fact, we are seeing that play out in the huge amounts of government funding geared towards innovation schemes. It set up a nearly $48 billion USD semiconductor state investment fund recently to bolster its semiconductor industry to reach international standards. It is still some years behind, but it is fast catching up. And this happens after the US imposed restrictions on the export of US chips to China. So China is also focusing on other growth engines like cross-border e-commerce as well as advanced manufacturing, general merchandise exports that are untouched by tariffs. They are so far doing well. We have a very, very popular apps like Taobao and Shein that, people from all across the world are tapping onto. And I spoke to an analyst from CBRE China, Mr. Sam Xie, and he said that it is a bright spot that's reflected in the high demand for warehouse spaces, especially in Guangdong province. So in that province, we're seeing 95% of warehouse demand coming from the cross-border e-commerce sector. Another bright spot he was talking about is also the shift to advanced manufacturing. As government funding goes towards helping traditional firms shift and transform to high-tech manufacturing, we are seeing these firms expand their business operations. Have a listen.
We're talking about 1/5 of the total office demand coming from those high value-added manufacturers. Warehouse market, very similarly, 2023, 2024, you got a surge of demand coming from the new energy auto parts and the new energy vehicles. They have been a rising engine for certain cities, especially in Yangtze River Delta region. And also you got rising demand coming from the inland China cities, cities like Chongqing, expanding their current offices, upgrading their office into better location or better quality building. We do notice that this segment has been more resilient despite the current weaker economic fundamentals.
So, Deborah, aside from all the business news we've been talking about, I'm just curious to know, Chinese residents, just how closely are they watching the U.S. election?
Very much so, especially Chinese citizens who are working or hoping to work in the U.S. Now, U.S. launched the China Initiative in 2018, which scrutinizes Chinese-born researchers, and that came amid increased fears of espionage as well as technology theft. And during that period, that program, although no one has been accused officially, many of them who came under investigation, they lost their jobs. So we're seeing an increased trend of Chinese scientists, researchers exiting the U.S. right now. And they're saying that they're nervous because increased tensions, that continued tensions that we're seeing in spite of the results of the next administration, they're fearing that there could be similar repercussions like we saw in 2018. And others who are waiting their work visa or study visas to the U.S., they are hopeful that a Harris presidency might actually be kinder to them and it could help with that visa process because of Harris's association with immigrants. However, if a Trump administration does happen, they are fearful that any hope of working or studying in the U.S. might be cut short because a Trump administration could give rise to more protectionist policies. Back to you.
That's right. I don't know anyone who's not watching the U.S. elections very closely. Thank you so very much. CNA's Deborah Wong in Hong Kong. Right, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Chinese markets ending the day with gains as lawmakers gather in Beijing to hash out what could be a major stimulus deal. Some respite for South Korean retail investors after the opposition joins the government in axing a plan to impose levies on capital gains. Good to have you back on East Asia Tonight on CNA. It is now time for your business news, and we begin with Greater China markets ending the day with gains as lawmakers gather in Beijing this week for the country's top legislative session. And the Standing Committee of National People's Congress is expected to hash out a stimulus package, China's largest effort to lift growth since the pandemic. And analysts say that the stimulus package could be even bigger if Donald Trump wins the U.S. presidential election tomorrow. Well, Lorraine Tan is from Morningstar, and she explains how China's NPC meeting and the U.S. presidential election may impact trading behavior in the region.
Investors are likely to stay sidelined this week, pending the U.S. election news. But generally speaking, I mean, we do see buying opportunities for beaten down stocks and good quality names in China. We're expecting real estate prices to bottom out sometime in the middle of 2025 as inventory absorption gets through, and I think that would start to improve sentiment somewhat. And so the Modi names that we like include things like Tencent, Yum China, and these are high quality names. Maotai is another one that has been beaten down, have pulled back from the recent run up, and we still think there's still value there.
Well, for more insights and analysis, let's bring in Alfred Shipke, Director of the East Asian Institute and Professor of the Practice of International Finance at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. Well, thanks for joining us this evening, Professor. Well, clearly time running short for China to meet its 5% GDP growth target this year, raising the pressures for a final year-end push. So, Professor, what economic measures will you be looking out for at this upcoming meet?
Well, I think, first of all, there is broad consensus among the leadership that a big package need to be rolled out to address the challenges that are coming from the real estate sector, from local governments, and the overall sentiment, the weak demand that exists in China, and of course the deflationary pressures. So the package will be large, and of course the Minister of Finance has already highlighted that it will be one of the largest in recent history.
Right. So, as what you've mentioned, the market has been speculating about this multi-year package, ranging anywhere from $280 billion to more than 5 times that amount. Professor, do you have a figure for us? And this, in other words, you're saying that there is enough impetus for the lawmakers to approve this major stimulus package we are looking out for?
Well, I think, first of all, after the action on the monetary policy side, some of the announcement on the fiscal side, now everybody is focusing on the details on the fiscal. The fiscal clearly is going to be what everybody is going to look forward to. Now, I think it is important to remind everybody there are different elements of it. I'm very certain that there will be a relatively large package that will contribute to de-risking, meaning that local government have enough financing to execute. As you know, they have been a drag in growth. And the other one is to stabilize the real estate sector. I think the key part is, and this could be a surprise on the positive side, whether in addition to that, there is also support to households, and that is more direct support to households. And the last part is, there might be 2 components of it. One, the amount that will be released immediately, but also some language to what will come down the road further on.
And, Professor Shipke, there's obviously a lot of pressure to try and reassure this nervous market. Then help us understand that what could be the consequences if it falls short of expectations.
Again, markets are hoping for a big surprise. I think if what has been articulated so far in the media, and that is well known by markets, materializes, maybe then the reaction would be more muted. I think what could be an upside risk would be if indeed there are components in the package that speak to the direct support of households. And that remains to be seen. I think for the most part, some support or a sizable support has already been baked into a market's expectation.
Right. And obviously, we're still waiting for all these, the stimulus package to be announced when the meeting wraps up on Friday. And in the meantime, the U.S. election results would be expected by then. To what extent do you think the results could influence the scale of Beijing's stimulus package?
In my view, I think the focus of this package will be on China's domestic challenges, that is real estate sector, local government, the weak demand, rather than the outcome of the U.S. election. there will be time, especially at the next work conference in December, and then, of course, the NPC, to factor in what the implications of the elections would be. But remember, there are many elements to it. We might have more clarity on who won the election by the end of the week, but even that is not 100% assured. And then secondly, even that, once that is available, that information, there's the question about what kind of a cabinet any of the two candidates would put together, because again, one would speculate about potential responses, also very much on the members of the cabinet. So I would think that the focus and the announcement now is mostly related to China's economic conditions as we see them today. But of course, depending on the outcome, there will be deliberations as soon maybe as early December, what that could mean, and potentially even in terms of China's next growth target for 2025. Of course, that would only be finally announced at the time of the NPC in March.
Right. And the NPC meeting outcome aside, I'm wondering, Professor, whether it's a Harris or a Trump presidency, which candidate do you think would benefit East Asia more?
I think that is, of course, a function of how each of the two candidates ultimately goes about implementing what they have said so far. I think there is some discounting, meaning especially if Trump were to win, that part of what has been articulated by him, but also potentially by a future president of Harris, that was part of the election rhetoric. The details ultimately remain to be seen. The second one is, I think there would be a difference in terms of short and long-term implications for this part of the world, Asia and the Pacific, but also for the world overall. I think there is no doubt that probably in the short term, the implications and negative implications of a Trump administration will be larger, both for China in the short term and then by definition also for Asia, given the importance of China's economy for the region. But in the medium to long term, that is not so clear. Depending on how you analyze this, there could actually be marginal benefits compared to other parts of the world, for example, Europe, even under a Trump administration.
All right, good to know. Thanks very much for your insights, Alfred Shipke, Director of the East Asian Institute and a Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. Mitsubishi Corporation and Nissan are reportedly set to enter a joint venture related to autonomous driving. Well, according to a local Japanese newspaper, the new company will also provide services related to the use of EV batteries as storage batteries. Now, reports are also saying that the new company will be launched by March 2025, with both automakers holding equal shares in the joint venture. Well, investors not showing the plan a whole lot of love. As you can see there, both companies in the red at the close of the trading session. Mitsubishi Core tumbling more than 3%, while Nissan closed at around 2% lower. South Korea may soon scrap a plan to tax profits on financial investments of retail investors after the main opposition party announced that it would drop its fight against the move. The government had plans to introduce a tax of at least 20% if annual capital gains from stock investments exceed 50 million won. Well, that's just over $36,000. And those who earned more than 2.5 million won, or around $2,000, from other financial assets would also have to pay. Now, it was originally due to take effect last year, but was delayed by 2 years until 2025. Well, earlier this year, the government went back on the plan in a bid to boost investor sentiment and stock values. Korea's retail investors account for about 2/3 of the daily stock market turnover. Well, they had argued that this tax weight on investor sentiment at a time when the Korean market is a laggard among Asian peers. The sentiment was echoed by the main opposition, a Democratic Party leader, Lee Jae-myung, who told reporters they can't ignore the position of the 15 million investors. South Korean markets cheering the news, both Kospi and the Kosdaq ending the day solidly in the green. Shifting our attention to South Korea's SK Innovation, shifting to a net loss in its latest earnings, with the company blaming inventory losses due to concerns over slowing Chinese demand and potential U.S. recession. Well, the owner of South Korea's top refiner, SK Energy, posted an operating loss of $307 million for the July to September period. And in the same period last year, SK Innovation had made an operating profit of $1.1 billion. Now, lower demand for EV batteries also weighed on the quarterly results. SK Innovation holds an 89% stake in SK On, which is the country's third largest car battery maker. And let's look ahead now. SK Innovation says that it expects oil prices to bottom in the fourth quarter, and it also foresees better refining margins due to improved heating demand, U.S. economic growth, as well as China's economic stimulus policies. Shares in SK Innovation bucking the trend on the Kospi and closing the red, about 0.5%. Okay, time now for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, Malaysia's leader makes his third trip to China in 2 years, seeking to boost ties that's been weighed down by a territorial dispute in the South China Sea. And Myanmar's army chief also bound for China this week. Min Online will be visiting Kunming, his first trip to the neighboring country since seizing power in a 2021 coup. Hello, you're watching East Asia Tonight. The U.S. presidential elections on the horizon, and companies based in China are under pressure to consider their presence in Asia's largest economy, amid fears of an escalation of the trade war between the two rival superpowers. And time is running out for China to hit its 5% economic growth target. Lawmakers are meeting in Beijing to hammer out a stimulus package that can carry the nation past the finish line, the size of which, experts say, will depend on who wins the White House. Malaysia's leader heads to China, seeking to strengthen relations with his country's top trading partner that's been weighed down by competing territorial claims in the South China Sea. Well, the 4-day trip by Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim will be his third to China in 2 years. He will be meeting top officials in Shanghai and Beijing as the two countries mark half a century of relations. The Chinese Premier Li Qiang visited Kuala Lumpur in June to commemorate that milestone, where both sides signed MOUs on Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, as well as the green and digital economies. Now, these agreements also include Malaysia exporting fresh durians to China. Prime Minister Anwar has sought a close and constructive relationship with China, which has been his country's largest trading partner for the past 15 years. And it's also the fifth biggest foreign investor in Malaysia. It is unclear if Mr. Anwar will address South China Sea issues with leaders in Beijing. China's territorial claims in the disputed waters are of significant concern to other ASEAN members like Vietnam and the Philippines. And the tensions are likely to take center stage next year when Malaysia takes over the group's rotating chairmanship. And for more CNA's Afifa Arifin joins us now from Kuala Lumpur. Afifa, have you heard anything that's planned on Prime Minister Anwar's itinerary in China?
Well, Malaysia Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim will be making a significant visit to China with stops in Shanghai and Beijing over the next couple of days. This trip, as you said, is his third to China in 2 years and follows closely on the heels of Chinese Premier Li Qiang's visit to Malaysia in June, which had marked 50 years of diplomatic ties between the two countries. Now, when Premier Li was in Malaysia, both countries had committed to deepening economic partnerships. They had signed various MOUs focused on the Belt and Road Initiative and also renewed their 5-year economic and trade cooperation plan, which will promote growth in various sectors like manufacturing, agricultural infrastructure, and the digital economy. Now, PM Anwar is heading to China with a full agenda. He's expected to meet some of China's top leaders, both political and business leaders, starting in Shanghai, where he will attend the China International Import Expo, an event that's officiated by Premier Li himself. Now, this expo is seen as a key platform for Mr. Anwar, as he's reportedly keen on expanding market access for Malaysian products into China, tapping on the vast Chinese consumer market and, of course, strengthening Malaysia's trade position. Additionally, Mr. Anwar's schedule also includes engagements with major Chinese companies, some state-owned giants, some multinationals, and these companies span a range of strategic sectors, including technology, energy, semiconductors, and also lithium battery production. And by engaging with these firms, Mr. Anwar is not only showcasing Malaysia's openness to Chinese investments, but also looking to enhance collaborative projects that could benefit Malaysia's tech and energy sectors. Of course, the high point of the visit will be potentially a bilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and this face-to-face discussion could provide both leaders an opportunity to push forward Malaysia's economic and strategic goals, as well as to solidify their alignment on several key issues.
Well, it sounds like Prime Minister Anwar has a packed schedule. We've talked about how, this is a special year because both sides are marking 50 years of relations. But what else do we know in terms of the significance of this trip?
Well, under Mr. Anwar's leadership, we know that Malaysia has always pursued this balanced, constructive relationship with China, which has been one of Malaysia's top trading partners for more than a decade. And the PM has shown strong commitment to nurturing this relationship amid a complex global environment. The official narratives for both countries also consistently emphasize the depth of their friendship and cooperative efforts. A major point of interest for this trip is, of course, the topic of the South China Sea. And Malaysia has traditionally maintained a very moderate stance on this contentious issue, but PM Anwar had recently suggested that a more assertive diplomatic approach to handling the South China Sea issue is something that he has described as rather successful during discussions in Malaysia. And so his government has been aiming to strike this delicate balance, asserting Malaysia's sovereignty while, of course, maintaining constructive engagements with Beijing. In June, both countries had agreed to initiate long-awaited bilateral talks on the South China Sea, and so a possibly renewed dialogue will be closely watched across Southeast Asia and beyond, as many in the region hope that Malaysia's diplomatic approach could perhaps bring fresh perspective to the table, especially given Malaysia's role as ASEAN chair next year. Another significant topic that could be on the agenda is, of course, Malaysia's interest in joining BRICS, a group that's seen as a counterweight to Western economic alliances. And analysts are expecting Mr. Anwar to discuss this with President Xi, as Malaysia's inclusion could definitely enhance its global trade networks and open new avenues for investments.
CNA's Afifa Arifin from Kuala Lumpur. Always good speaking with you. Thank you. Now, Myanmar's Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing is set to visit China this week, the first visit to the country's giant neighbour since he seized power in a 2021 coup. Now, his trip to the Chinese city of Kunming is scheduled for this Wednesday and Thursday, where he will attend summits of the Greater Mekong Sub-region and the Ayeyar Wadi Chao Phraya Mekong Economic Cooperation Strategy. Myanmar's MRTV also reported that the army chief will participate in a meeting with neighbouring countries, Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam. The discussions will work on enhancing bilateral relations, economic and development in several sectors. The Southeast Asian nation has been in a state of flux since the coup, including along its key border with China. Armed rebels have made rapid gains in the area since launching a surprise offensive last October. And this has alarmed Beijing, which, in response has sealed parts of the border and shut off imports to territory under rebel control. A European Union's foreign policy chief is on his second day of his South Korea to discuss how both sides can better handle the growing security threats that's posed by North Korea's dispatching of soldiers to Russia for its war against Ukraine. Well, in a post on X, Mr. Josep Borrell said that he met with South Korean Defense Minister Kim Jong-un, and both sides reaffirmed their shared commitment to support Ukraine. Mr. Borrell said he even encouraged Seoul to step up their assistance to Kyiv. South Korea has long refrained from directly sending weapons to Ukraine and has instead chosen to provide non-lethal aid, including equipment to clear mines. But following the recent development between Pyongyang and Moscow, Seoul said it was open to all possible scenarios of assistance. Mr. Borrell arrived in South Korea on Sunday after a trip to Japan. The EU chief began his visit by visiting the heavily fortified demilitarized zone that splits the two Koreas, and said that it reminded him of the need to invest more in peace. Coming up on East Asia tonight, Japan's bid to restart one of its mothballed nuclear power plants abruptly halted after the failure of a monitoring device. And we turn to the U.S., where the race to the White House is in its final stretch, with about a day to go to the U.S. presidential election. A final lap in the U.S. presidential race now in sight, with about a day to go before Americans decide who their next leader will be. Well, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump both gearing up for a final blow as the race appears set for a photo finish.
In one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime, and we have momentum. It is on our side. Can you feel it?
We have a big, a beautiful lead. All we have to do, Mike, all we have to do is go out on Tuesday and vote, vote, vote. We're going to win it.
Both candidates there making one last pitch as they zip across battleground states, including North Carolina, Michigan and Pennsylvania, as polls still show them in a dead heat. Opinion polls suggest Ms. Harris getting stronger support among women voters, while Trump makes headway with Hispanic voters, particularly men.
A woman's place is in the House, the White House.
A lot of people's biggest argument is like Kamala Harris says that she's going to be doing this, this, and this, but she's already been in office for 4 years. Why hadn't she already done it?
Life happens, it can go. That's why we're out here working and reminding people that we need your vote, no matter. That is the most nonviolent thing you can do.
Trump's been playing up claims of election fraud, though he's offered no proof. Ms. Harris has pushed back, calling out the former president for trying to delude voters.
They are fighting so hard to steal this damn thing. Look at what's going on. Look at what's going on in your state.
I would ask, in particular, people who have not yet voted, to not fall for his tactic, which I think includes suggesting to people that if they vote, their vote won't matter.
Well, the battle for the White House could continue well beyond polling day itself. Trump sought to discredit the results in 2022, and this time he's doubling down on his efforts to sow seeds of distrust. Benji Haya visited Georgia to find out how real the threat is to the democratic process in one of the swing states on which the country's political future may hinge.
We have a breach of the Capitol to the upper level.
January 6th, 2021.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
A mob, inspired by then-President Trump's election lies, staged a deadly riot, storming Congress. An assault on the heart of democracy, an effort to subvert the will of the people, an insurrection attempt praised by Trump as an act of patriotism.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Today, there are swathes of America still very much in the grip of this false yet pervasive notion that Donald Trump had the 2020 election stolen from him. Places like Georgia, the state that's become synonymous with an infamous phone call.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
President Trump appearing to demand Georgia's Secretary of State concoct votes for him that simply don't exist, so he can flip the state from blue to red. That call formed just one part of an alleged widespread pressure campaign that landed Trump with criminal charges in a trial yet to take place. In the meantime, he and his allies are laying the groundwork to contest another loss. Dozens of Republicans who were so-called fake electors in 2020 are currently serving as official electors in battleground states this year. These are people who, last election, intentionally tried to submit documents wrongfully declaring Trump the winner in their states. The former president has already suggested without evidence that Democrats could use illegal immigrants or mail-in ballots to cheat, stoking fears that he'll cry foul again. And several Republican-controlled legislatures have opened the door to chaotic confrontations, perhaps even civil unrest, by expanding access for partisan observers at vote-counting locations.
What we see is that the MAGA Trump influence, those activists and voter fraud conspiracy theorists have worked their way into election administration and power at all levels of government to be able to successfully do what they tried to do and failed 4 years ago, which is overturn an election result that they did not like.
I'm calling to order the Tuesday, October 8th, 2024 session of the State Election Board.
A new set of rules also granted this body, Georgia's pro-Trump majority Electoral Board, greater control over procedures.
So we're inside the state capital, and such are the stakes in Georgia, and frankly because of the politicization of the electoral process here, what happens in America in November or beyond could well hinge on what goes on in this very building.
Some of the board's powers were since struck down by a judge who said the changes were unconstitutional. He ruled officials can't legally refuse to certify results, and their proposal to hand count each ballot was rebuffed by the state's Supreme Court. For Democrats, the solution to all this is very simple. The best way to tackle unfounded allegations of voter fraud or a tampered process is to show up. In other words, mobilize turnout, make sure the result isn't close, and deliver a victory so convincing that it's effectively too big to risk. It's why Senator Warnock, a celebrity in his own right in these parts, has brought along a Georgia-born Hollywood star to make some calls for Kamala. Actress Julia Roberts swung by a phone banking session, hoping to press the flesh and press the right buttons. Hey, girl. Hey, girl. To lock in votes for Vice President Harris. The strategy is working. The country's seen record-high early voting numbers, with millions of people submitting their ballot well before Election Day itself. Yet, even if the safeguards hold, and especially if turnout is high, counting and verifying votes could drag on for days. Any delay would give Donald Trump an opportunity to cast doubt on an outcome, undermine confidence in the system, launch a litany of lawsuits, and possibly encourage his supporters to protest. Newly elected lawmakers will convene for the congressional certification of the Electoral College on January 6, 2025. A peaceful transfer of power is by no means guaranteed. Benji Haya, CNA, Georgia.
And do keep with us here on CNA TV as we bring you extensive analysis and wall-to-wall coverage of the presidential and congressional polls from 7 a.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time on the 6th of November. Right, turning our attention to Japan now, where its bid to revive a mothballed nuclear plant has been put on hold after operations at the Onagawa facility were halted due to equipment failure. Tohoku Electric Power discovered that a device used to detect neutrons had stopped working just before a reactor was due to start generating energy. Well, the operator says there will be no radioactive impact. The plant in eastern Japan reopened last month for the first time since the Fukushima nuclear accident in 2011. And though it was closest to the epicenter of the earthquake that triggered the disaster, it was able to shut down all its reactors safely. Further south, tsunami waves from the quake knocked out all power, including backup generators at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, leading to a nuclear meltdown. And it's only recently that radioactive debris have been extracted from one of its crippled reactors, a process that is expected to take decades to complete. 3 Chinese astronauts have returned to Earth on the Shenzhou 18 spacecraft after spending 6 months aboard the Tiangong space station. Well, their return capsule descended with the help of parachutes, touching down at the Dongfeng landing site in Inner Mongolia early on Monday. Ground crews helped the 3 onto stretchers before they were sent for medical checks.
我们神舟家族太空接力，我相信在不久的将来，中国人在轨驻留的时间记录将会很快被刷新。
During their 6-month stint, the crew conducted China's longest spacewalk when they installed anti-space debris equipment, which took more than 8 hours. They were replaced by another 3-person crew late last month, which included China's first civilian female astronaut. The Tiangong space station is permanently crewed by teams of 3, rotated every 3 to 6 months. It's the crown jewel of China's space program, which been ramped up under President Xi Jinping. And Beijing says it's on track to send a crewed mission to the moon by 2030, where it plans to build a base on the lunar surface. It looks like North Korea has won the FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup for the 3rd time after beating Spain in the final yesterday. Well, the victory sealed North Korea's status as the most successful in the tournament's history. Well, the team was undefeated in this year's run right to the top. Well, Spain scored first with a goal from Celia Segura Rodriguez in the 61st minute. But North Korea leveled just 3 minutes later with John Il-chung rounding goalkeeper Laia Lopez and slotting the ball home. Well, neither side was able to break that deadlock, and the match went into a penalty shootout. Well, Jong Pok-yong missed the North's second penalty, but Iris Ashley Santiago and Pau Comendador also missed their shots for Spain. Well, that proved fatal, allowing North Korea to win 4-3. And of course, this title further solidifies North Korea's dominance in women's youth football, with their under-20 team also claiming the World Cup for a record 3rd time in September. Asia's football chief has hailed the North's dedication in establishing a consistent and dynamic pipeline of future stars that he says will serve as an inspiration for others to emulate. But North Korea's achievements at the youth level have not translated into success for its senior team. FIFA's ranking shows the country has been unable to break past the top 5 for more than 20 years, peaking at 9th more recently. Well, some experts say that the gap may be due to the presence of professional leagues in other countries that provide players with a competitive environment to hone their skills, while also allowing for more financial support from different stakeholders, such as sponsors and advertisers. And that wraps up Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and look us up on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Thanks for your company.